in the chat, like thinking about how sometimes we have to fight for these things that we know might be best for our students, right? And really do that advocating work for them. Some do it in class, but some need more time or a different space or other materials. And then giving them supports too to kind of figure things out. I'm loving these answers, and I think Joe Feldman would love them too.
Definitely. So now we look at examining the homework. So, you know, in the book it says we can't deduct points for incorrect answers on homework, which penalizes students for mistakes. And at that same time, tell students that homework is just practice and that mistakes are a necessary part of learning. And boy, my students really, they want it perfect. They just go for that all the time. There's still, that shift hasn't happened for them yet. And I don't think it's happened for teachers either, really. But homework helps kids to practice. So that goes on that point that we already had. The practice that they learned in class, it gives teachers the valuable insight into her students, his or her understandings. So yeah, definitely. But then there's that question, who's doing the homework at home? You think they've got it and they show you otherwise when you're doing another formative assessment in class. So definitely.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I was thinking about too, as I was reading and revisiting this chapter on homework, is this question about the kinds of supports that teachers offer in their classroom that their students might not have at home. And so I'm happy for you to throw this in the chat, but I'll share a little anecdote with you because I did a little poll of all of my grown-up friends, right? Friends who do not work in education. I have a few. My husband's an accountant. Like, we chatted with folks and I was like, friends, we talk about how homework is like preparing our students for the real world and all of this stuff. I was like, in the work world, how many of you actually have homework? And my husband doesn't have homework. Like, he works his hours at work and all of his work gets completed at work, or at least during work hours. And most of the grownups that I talked to when I pulled this, like, my uncle is a mechanic, my mom is an administrative assistant, like all of these people that I talked to, I was like, so do you have homework? And they were like, no, everything's done at work. And I would say that like COVID has messed this up a little bit, but like pre-COVID time, if you're doing work in your work environment, like during your work hours, those are conditions that are controlled like by your boss. Like, maybe you have a cubicle that helps you focus on what you're doing. You have proper equipment that you can use. You have ergonomic chairs. You have like the supports that you need at that work to get stuff done, because your bosses or your workplace or the corporation or the company or whomever you're working for like makes sure that all of that stuff is there to help their employees be successful, right? And as teachers, I think we do that naturally in our classrooms, but then we send students off like to their homes, and that's something that we, and that I would argue that they have no control over a lot of the time, right? Especially, if they're living with parents who might control things, they might have to care for younger siblings. There's all sorts of stuff that happens in these students' lives. And quite honestly, my only friends who answered that they have homework included my brother-in-law, who's a lawyer, but he's like, I don't know if it counts as homework because they're billable hours, so he still gets paid for them. And then my sister is in medicine and she has to be on call sometimes. But like everybody else was like, no, in the grown-up work world, we leave our work at work. And the place where we do our work is a controlled environment that allows us to be successful at the things that we're doing. I'm looking in the chat and I'm seeing this message. The French president a few years ago banned homework because of the inequity. Yeah, and Angela, thinking about how there are lots of factors that if we're really assessing what students know and are able to do, to really think about what's happening there, and then yeah, if they love it and believe in it, we can't stop them from doing the work wherever it is. Exactly, right? And thinking about counting the mastery they gain in their other endeavors, to like really allowing them to pursue their interests and the things that they're passionate about, and allowing that to happen. I know at universities they do that sometimes, where they give you like prior work experience credits or various things. And I love this, that some schools have time in the bell schedule for them to do work and have advisors to check in, and really helping kids advocate for themselves and giving them agency. I think that's a super, super powerful tool. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Flex Friday. So then we get to our next piece, where why students copy, why students may copy. And further on, it says, my ability to complete homework depends on my environment and circumstances. When I have fewer supports, I'm left with fewer options to complete homework other than to copy. And so we've had those students in our classrooms, and I can think of a couple. And I think for some students, is it fear? Is it that they're more motivated to do that so that the teacher isn't disappointed in them and they get a poor grade? And it's copying for all the wrong reasons. It isn't always just because they're, that lazy student and don't feel like putting the time into it. It's usually a little more intrinsic than that. So.
Yeah, I think one of the points Feldman is making here is about how some of the systems that are in place in schools have these unintended consequences, right? It's how every dystopia starts out, right? Like every good dystopia starts out with somebody getting this brilliant idea about like, I'm gonna make things better. And then sometimes those ideas to make things better end up making things worse instead. And so, Feldman shares a number of these stories about how, like, when time is scarce and a student has to choose between sleep or completing homework, copying becomes the most efficient and healthy strategy to get the points. And again, that's about how some of these homework programs, like, and the way that homework gets counted in some classes, it's all about extrinsic motivation and just collecting the points. And it's less about this demonstration of skill and like, what do you know and what are you able to do? And Michelle, I love your idea that, like, don't ask questions that they can't Google, and really thinking about how we can really help our homework gauge our students' authentic abilities about what they know and can do in class, so that they're not feeling like they're forced or trapped or desperate enough to have to copy, that it feels like it's their only way out. It's the only way that they can get the points, or it's the only way that they can get to sleep at night. I mean, I can't even imagine. That's so sad.
I love Angela's comment about basically it's building that safe environment and building that relationship with a student to beforehand, and probably less of that copying might happen under that type of environment, taking care of themselves and you, and yeah. All right. Truth about homework. So students aren't copying because they're malicious or intentionally disrespectful. They may not even want to copy. They're doing it because they know they be penalized for not doing it. And copying therefore seems to be a reasonable and expedient choice. If they can't do the homework, they figure at least they can earn the points. as I had mentioned earlier. I kind of got ahead of myself in my comment. So that's what I usually find with somebody. Usually it's my higher, I'll say my higher performing students tend to do this more so than my lower ones.
Yeah, and I love, Jonathan, your comment in there about like the Maslow before Bloom, right? That our students can't learn their best if they're not being taken care of, and this need to belong. I know, Patty, I saw you there the other night at the Cornelius Minor session, and he talked so much about how learning is relational and how important those relationships are. And Angela, you mentioned that earlier in the chat too, and really thinking about this human-centered care in our classrooms, and how we need to recognize that humanity and these lives that our students are living outside of our classroom, right? So here's another question for us to consider, kind of together as a whole group. Think about students you've had in the past, or students that you currently have. What sorts of things are going on in their lives that might impact their ability to complete homework assignments well? I love that your school's doing a book study on We Got This. I have to tell you that when you're done reading Grading for Equity, like, go read We Got This. It's a fantastic one to check out. But I think about things that are happening in our students' lives that might be impacting their ability to complete homework assignments. And I'm thinking about a colleague of mine in the English department, and he spent at least one entire school year keeping a locker full of food and supplies and cat food for a student that he knew spent a lot of the time unhomed or was trying to make it on her own with her cat. And this teacher knew and recognized that she had a lot of pride and she didn't want to ask for help. And so making it just so that she could go to the locker and get what she needed, kind of like a food pantry situation almost. And really just taking care of her and her pet in that way, because when you're wondering where you're going to sleep at night, or where your food's going to come from, or if you're concerned about health outcomes or family members or whatever, it's really hard to like prioritize your English homework, right? Or math or social studies or whatever other homework, because sometimes there are bigger concerns. I'm seeing in the chat like more than one house, splitting between houses and thinking about how that works, multiple people in the room and being able to focus, trauma, being unhoused, chaotic households, mental illness, addiction, incarceration, all of these things that could be happening. And so many of these things are not things that are necessarily immediately visible. When we look at our students, we can't necessarily see if they have a parent who's incarcerated. We can't just look at them and tell some of this stuff. And if we haven't built those relationships, or for example, we just switched a whole new group of students at the semester break. And so I've had my students for 2 weeks, like we're still in the process of getting to know each other. So I know there are things about my students that I do not know yet that are definitely having an impact on their ability to be successful. And Sarah, I think you've got it right too. Clubs and sports and extracurriculars and being overbooked. I know I have groups of students who are like, if I'm not involved in everything, then I'll never get into an Ivy League school and I'll live in a van down by the river. And like they're very concerned and consumed by lots of things. And I think if we want them to be like whole people, we need to recognize and acknowledge that, like jobs and late nights and weekends. And I feel like too, we want them to be human, right? And have time for friends and family and all of that stuff.
Mm-hmm. Very relevant. And so definitely this pretty much wraps up a lot of what we saw in the chat. If we knew about a students' circumstances, their pressures, their schedules, the difficulties, we might forgive them for copying, and at times we might even agree with them. The challenge for us is that we don't know about students' circumstances and shouldn't expect them to tell us. Our implicit bias can make us see students copying as a sign of laziness or disrespect. And with this biased assumption, we punish their laziness by recording a 0 when we catch them copying homework. Yep.
And I think one of the points Feldman makes too is about like being willing to interrogate ourselves and our practices in this way. Like how is the system that I've set up maybe encouraging this, or how can I have a conversation, or like in chapter 9 talk about some of these restorative practices that can sort of deal with things. And so this is a rhetorical question, but Feldman poses it anyway in chapter 10. He says, how do we not disproportionately harm our vulnerable students, those who need more time to do homework, or those who have fewer supports and resources outside the school, and who most need the practice that homework is designed to provide? And his answer is crystal clear. Homework should not be included in the grade. Homework should not be included in the grade.
So practice makes perfect. So moving along, once teachers explicitly reconnect the purpose of homework to practice and prepare for assessment, to more successful results on the assessment, intrinsic motivation reawakens in students. You'll be shocked, Feldman notes, that you've had for so long accepted and propagated a system that relied so heavily, oh gosh, I can never say this word right, and so blah, 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 on intrinsic motivation. So absolutely. So you ask yourself, is the homework I'm giving necessary?
Yeah. And I'm noticing in the chat too, Angela, you make a really powerful point that I think goes back to our previous slide about how schools are inherently hierarchical systems. Like no matter how much we might try in our classroom spaces to make them co-learning spaces and to really make that learning dialogic and relational, there's still always a power dynamic. And this idea that it's really hard for students who might be shy or nervous or ashamed to have to ask for exceptions. And some of them may not have learned, may not have the social capital to advocate for themselves. And so I see this idea like an equity decision-making matrix. Every school should have one. You are preaching to the choir, my friend. I love that idea so incredibly much. And I feel like if there was more of that, if there were some of these checks in place where we could be like, okay, is what I'm doing, like, does it check the box before we do it? And I think as systems, as schools, as policies, yes, absolutely. But even if our system, even if our school department isn't at that point yet, I think we can do it within our individual classrooms too. And I want to really empower teachers to lead from their classrooms. I think this is a really hugely important thing, and it's something that I've wrestled with a lot in my teaching career, because, you know, there are times when we don't have the power to change these really big systems, not quite yet, but there are things we can do in our classrooms, and there are ways that we can be creative within the constraints that we have to still do what is right by the people who are in front of us. And so I think that part is really, really key. Yeah. Oh my gosh, I would love to see an example of an equity decision-making matrix. Yeah, if you have one to share, if your school or district has one, that would be so So fantastic. Yeah. And this idea of turning away from the way we have always done things.
Mhm.
I remember at the beginning of my teaching career, Lee, when I was student teaching, my mentor teacher told me that I could never give a 100 on a writing assignment because no piece of writing was ever perfect. And I had to unlearn that. Um, I think about some of the lessons that I learned about grading that this book has helped me unlearn as well. And about this idea about how important and necessary homework is, and instead really thinking about how important the skills are and what do students need to be able to do in order to demonstrate their ability to enact those skills. And so Feldman talks a lot about all of the benefits of excluding homework from the grade. He spends quite a long time detailing. There are 7 of them that go through the chapter, and a lot of this kind of rehashes some of the slides that we've been through already. But again, really thinking about how it takes away that incentive to copy, how it helps teachers reallocate their time. Like I know as a English teacher, bringing home like 2-foot stacks of paper to grade in my past, and how much time that took to give meaningful feedback that maybe they did or didn't. Look at helping students take more responsibility for their own learning and figuring out, like, when do you need more help and when do you need more practice and how do you know? Not double punishing students so that they lose points, allowing for different learning styles, not penalizing them for their environments, and helping our feedback to our students be heard and valued. And I love that Maya Angelou quote there, that when you know better, you do better. And absolutely, there's so much there.
To kind of backpedal a little bit on that too, is it's almost we're rethinking this for ourselves. But for, I don't know if any of you have experienced this, especially during COVID, that parents are often looking, you know, they're going with their own experiences and remember sitting down for hours at night, and that's what they expect their kids to do. And sometimes if you're under that, you know what, we're not doing homework this year, you'll often will get those emails from parents like, there's no homework. Why isn't there more homework? Can you provide something? So we the parents need help too. So equitable grading that's accurate and bias resistant includes nothing other than students' summative assessments results. So here we go.
Yeah. Um, and Feldman talks too, I love this analogy of using assessments as a bridge for us to access students' understanding, not as a hurdle for them to convince us of that understanding. And I think about, like, if more of us thought about how homework could be that bridge, how we could help students make that connection, right? To reestablish this relationship between practice and performance. And I think this is something that students inherently get, right? Like they get it if they're on athletic teams. Like they know they have to practice and go to the weight room and run laps in order to be able to perform on game day. Our musicians know that they have to practice and rehearse before the concert. Our thespians know that they have to go to rehearsal and learn their blocking before they get on stage. Like students understand that practice is related to performance in all these other aspects of life, but I feel like they don't tend to see it as much between homework and summative assessments. And I might argue that some of that is our fault as teachers for not helping them build those bridges and not helping them see those connections, because so many of us use grades. Hold on. We use grades to control our students and control their behaviors, as opposed to using those grades to teach them what they've been successful at and where they still need improvement. And Jonathan, I am seeing that note about gamers. My husband is exactly like that too. Yes, absolutely.
So we are at the point with breakout rooms. Okay, awesome. Okay. Right.
So
So I put the link to the Jamboard if you want to explain what they're.
thank you. Absolutely. Yep. I'm gonna, oh, do you know what? Hold on. We're gonna stop the share and then I'm gonna reshare the share so that we can take a look at the Jamboard. And for those of you who haven't used Jamboard, I love this so much. If you were at the Tech Unconference, I like chatted about it so much. So here that is, everybody should be able to jump on there and have all of those editing capabilities. So the questions are here, but thanks to somebody from group 6 last week, I heart that person so incredibly much. I put the questions on our slides for the breakout rooms too. So when you get sent into your breakout rooms, pay attention to which group number you're going into. And then we've got a couple of questions for you that relate to chapter 10 and the key concepts that Feldman talks about. And you have a couple of different ways you can respond by adding a sticky note. So if you come to this side menu and find the little sticky note icon, you can change your color that you want. Maybe I'm feeling a little pink today. And you can jot your note in there and add it to the board and move it around. You can also add a text box. And you do have the option, it's limited, but you can change up the color of the text that you add as well. So what we'd love is for you to keep a record of the conversation that your group has so that when we come back together into the whole group, we can refer to each other's thoughts and really kind of dig into what we talked about and how we can all do better. Because I think that's what this is all about, right?
Okay, and how much time are we going to have in the breakout rooms to have discussions today?
What are we thinking? 20,
20?
25 minutes?
Let's go with 20. Okay. Yeah. All right. So the timer will be at the top of your screen and the number of your room will also be at the top of the screen. You may need to put your mouse up there. All right, I'm going to send you off into your rooms. Good luck. Ta-da, we're on our way.
All right, fantastic. Friends, I hope that you had some really remarkable and productive conversations in your breakout rooms. We were lurking on the Jamboards to see some of the stuff that folks were posting. So actually, maybe it would make sense for us to go back into the screen share and we can take a look at some of the things that people posted on our Jamboard here. Let me get rid of my whiteboard there. What just happened? Here we go. So here's our Jamboard. If this sticky note is about Jamboard, yes, and I heart it. And if you want to know more, they should pay me to be an advertiser for it. But absolutely. I love, this question came up on a couple of the Jamboards. If students are remote, are all assignments homework? Yeah, what do we do about that in this weird, crazy COVID time? And I think that's a super interesting question, and different people have very different responses to that. I'm happy for us to use the chat, or you can unmute yourself to pipe up or use that raise hand function if that'll move you to the top so we can call on you. Oh, I like this. It seems like a more accurate way to think about whether it's independent versus supported work. Mm-hmm. That is a real paradigm shift that I appreciate very much. You had an administrator in a previous district tell you that homework was meant to extend learning at home. Yeah. I think, that's something I was talking about this because this this orange sticky note resonates with me about assigning independent reading as homework. I was like, my students have to read at home, because if they didn't read, then we couldn't do some of the things that we need to do to build those skills and practice. And so to some extent, for some of my classes, like there is that component where I do ask them to do things outside of class. Yeah. Yeah, extended learning at home often means homework for parents who are tired and busy, if they're able to do it. Yeah. And I think different parents are equipped in different ways, or not, and depending on working schedules and so many variables. I feel like, even as somebody who's a teacher, like when I get done with school, like I want to spend time with my kids, like playing Monopoly or Roblox. I don't want to like fight with them about doing homework that they may or may not be 100% interested in. And I wonder how many parents have that same sort of thing. Jonathan, I think Monopoly and Roblox definitely count as learning. I completely agree with you, but yeah, and I think that idea of honoring multiple ways of knowing and being in our classrooms
is fun.
and offering multiple ways of having students demonstrate what they're capable of. I remember last year in my American literature class, I'm teaching Emerson and Thoreau, and we're talking about the transcendentalists, and I had students build tiny transcendentalist cabins in Minecraft, and then they screencasted over like all of their design choices and how their design choices and how they built the environment around their cabins in the create mode like echoed these ideas that came out in Emerson and Thoreau. And I'm like, that was very cool.
That was so fun.
And better than like reading an essay. Not that essays can't be great too, but I feel like there are multiple ways of knowing and being in the classroom. And I wonder about the extent to which homework in the traditional sense actually honors that. I love this too, thinking about entering the assignments into the gradebook, but not factoring them into the final grade. Feldman says something very similar in that chapter where he talks about how you need to be able to tell the story of a student's grades so that like if they don't perform well on a summative assessment, you can point to the evidence in the formative assessments and the evidence in the work that's led up to that to be like, this is the story of your learning. So that might account for why you did or didn't do well. And again, I think that will help students make that connection between like practice and performance, right? Which we want them to do when it comes to homework, I think. Let's see what is going on in some of these other groups. Look at this. Yeah, lots of folks not assigning or grading homeworks. I love this tagging system where students can go for help or makeup. That's very cool. I have to say I'm jealous of that. Like we don't have homeroom, we don't have advisory, we don't really have anything like that. And if students want extra help, like they really have to advocate for it at my school in my context. And so I appreciate systems that have some of these supports kind of built in. I like to parents and students have a hard time seeing things in the grade book that are excluded from a grade calculation, and it can be a distraction from learning too. Yeah, I definitely think that's true. And I think there are ways to some extent to like play with the category weights in Infinite Campus, for example, right? Where, you know, you can still put an assignment in as like, you know, 100-point assignment or whatever in Infinite Campus. But if you kind of weight your categories so that like that classwork or homework, those formative assessments count for like a decimal point, like 0.1 of a percent, and then your other categories like your summative assessments and your performative assessments count for like all the rest of the stuff. I think there are ways that, you know, people can still kind of see things, but that it counts in different ways. And so thinking about how we can work within the constraints of our systems to do what's best for kids.
Mm-hmm.
I know, like this double Google Classroom and Power School, like we have Google Classroom and Infinite Campus. And so, yeah, thinking about all of the ways that we assess students and assign numbers to them instead of like really thinking about powerful feedback and what that might look like and how that could maybe work more effectively than giving them a number. That's something I think about kind of a lot. How about here's another Jamboard from group number 3. And folks, feel free to pipe in and ask questions, offer suggestions. Sorry, the cat was getting something he shouldn't have been. Yeah, thinking about building that connection between practice and assessment. I think letting students remediate assessments and really think about what kind of learning they've done well. I know my daughter gets to do that, and she has to identify, like, was it a mathematical mistake? Was it a mistake that had to do with like a particular skill or a conceptual mistake? And so she has to be reflective about what kind of mistake did I make, and then write out the response and fix that. And so I love this idea of helping them learn from their mistakes. I'm seeing something in the chat here. Yeah, academic grades and habits of work and learning grades. Yeah, do you want to talk more about what you just threw in the chat for us?
Yeah, sure. So we have, I'm at Casco Bay High School in Portland, and we for a while have been doing standards-based grading. And so we give grades for both habits of work grades, which is what you would think of as like formative stuff. And then summative grades are our standards-based grades. And those are the ones that are credit bearing. Those are the ones that are based on course standards and say whether you pass the class or not. But we use habits of work grades, like you guys were just saying, in terms of like, you know, you didn't get the grade you wanted or the grade you need. What happened? And part of what happened is like, did you practice your free throws? Oh, you didn't. So maybe that's the connection there. And we also recognize that some kids are working just as hard as anyone else, but they might not be on the same timeline. So, you know, having an arbitrary like stop time, like you have to get it the same as everyone else, is kind of unfair. So we look at the habits of work grade as a way to say, you deserve more time and more support, and we're going to give it to you. So in our school, if you have a habits of work grade of 3 or higher and you haven't met the standards, you automatically get an incomplete, which gives you like 2 more works, typically 2 more weeks to finish off the work. So it's a way to recognize that it's important by putting a number grade on it, but it also isn't going to stop a kid from passing the class. And so kids could get below a meeting standards grade on a habits of work part of their grade, but still pass the class. And I always tell them, like, it's totally possible. It's kind of rare. Like kids who don't practice and we don't, it's part of learning the content. So it's rare. And if a kid is totally crushing it without doing their homework, without doing these formative assessments, then that's information for me to say, I'm not challenging this kid enough. This kid is, cruising along and doesn't need to do any of this stuff and still passes the test.
Yeah, I wish there was more of that. Like I work in a system where we were told at the end of the semester that we have to get special permission for incompletes because they want a limited number of incompletes at the end of the semester. And I feel like so many systems are talking about like grading like normal and going back to normal, and like we're still not normal yet for so many of these students and for so many of our learning contexts. And I wish that more systems and more folks could be really reflective about all the things that that the pandemic and all of the things about inequity that are being revealed, right? Because Amy, you make the perfect point. Like normal was not that great and definitely not equitable. And some of the things that we have going on now are working better for students than the normal was. And I hope that as we move forward and as we think about how we're going to come back from this, or maybe what next year is going to look like, that we can take the best parts of all of these contexts and situations and kind of pull them together in ways that make sense for us and for our learners. And I really I appreciate that. I love like including only summatives in the grade already and thinking about how how homework is a lot of like preparing for class, that homework for accountability's sake in some cases, like if you're going to be an active participant in our classroom community, like you have to have done the reading so that you can do that, or you have to have thought about questions to bring to our Socratic seminar or whatever. So thinking about things that way, and untraining and unlearning, like in the same way that we as teachers have some unlearning to do, helping our students unlearn that it's not just always about the points, right? That there's so much more to the learning. And Amy, I see your comment in there and worrying about what the people with power are going to try to do, and thinking about local school board meetings. And so again, I just want to echo what I said earlier about being empowered as a teacher to lead from your classroom. And I think if you can explain why you're doing what you're doing and how it works, and if you can make that work within the system that you're constrained by, I think there are ways to still win for ourselves and for our students. And I don't know if I mentioned this this picture book before. It's one of my favorite picture books. It's by Portis, and it's called Not a Box. And the character is a little bunny, and he has this cardboard box, and the narrator's like, "Hey bunny, that's a nice box you've got there." And the bunny is outraged. He's like, "It's not a box, it's a race car. It's not a box, it's a rocket ship." And I think so often, like, we're told to think outside the box, and I'm not sure that's what we need to do. I think we need to be creative with the box we're given, right? Because a lot of times I think, we might not be able to change a policy right away, and we still have to follow the policy, right? And so think about, like, what can we do with the box we have? How can we take that box and turn it into a rocket ship so that our students can still succeed and be amazing and do great things and learn. And I think that's where it's at for me. So yeah, an equitable rocket ship. Heck yes, I love that.
That's a great image. That could be, where we go with this.
Daughter needs to draw that, Stephanie.
There you go. She'll make our rocket ship. This has been really, I mean, I love doing this right before we take that week break, giving ourselves some time just to process, because that's always a challenge, is having enough time to internalize and to reflect. So we have 3 weeks before the next session on March 4th, which is great because that gives you some time to prepare for the next session, but also to look back and to think about some of the changes you've made as we've started this second half of the year. I'd like to invite Angela to come in for a moment and talk about what happens after we're done. What happens during the next session, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. Angela?
Hi, everybody. Thanks. After we come back to our sessions, this will be March 4th and March 11th. So in a couple of weeks, I will be presenting with Beth and Renee, both from Kennebunk, and we are going to focus on chapters 11 and 12 and 13. So for March 4th, it's chapters 11 and 12, and that takes a close look about motivation. And we're going to revisit some of the practices that came from accurate and bias-resistant grading in the earlier. So this last part of the book is about taking the concepts and the foundation that has been laid, and we will build on that and find practices and really look at things that we are able to try in our classroom, things that we're able to move toward. I'm going to take us back to Patty in session 1 in December 3rd, laying out the very first question about what is best for all students. And I think that strand across everything we do with this text. And we're going to look at that lens. A driving principle from chapter 11, if you haven't read it yet, you're going to be focused on the way that we grade should motivate students. And so as you prepare chapters 11 and 12, think about what practices do you see motivate students, make them feel good, make them want to try, make them want to learn. And I am getting the sense from a lot of you that you are already on the page here. So we are about bringing those examples and sharing and exchanging. So if you would read 11 and 12, and then we're going to focus on choosing an equitable grading practice and make a plan to try something that you haven't done yet. And as we all evolve and change and improve, we'll hopefully be able to bring up our practice in what we do. And then the following session will be more focused on the final chapter 13. And we're going to look about how we really get students to take ownership, and we look at self-regulation and creating a community of feedback, and the way we change that culture of learning for our students. So we're excited to take you through those sections, but it'll be very helpful if you read 11 and 12 for the March 4th. And if you get a chance over break maybe and you want to read 13, it'll be easier to reference as we build. So we look forward to that session.
Great. Thank you, Angela. Yep, I think we're all looking forward. This has been such a rich discussion all along. So I want to mention that I put the feedback form for today into the chat box. It's really, really helpful if you fill that out, even if you're not looking to get the certificate. And I want to, again, thank Stephanie and Melanie for taking us through this look at bias and helping us to see unintentional bias. I think it's systemic bias is often what happens, and we're not even clear on that. So any last thoughts that you'd like to share with us?
So the one last thought that I have that I'll share with everyone is that I am I am again 100% grateful for all of you. And I think sometimes so many of us feel like we're really isolated and trying to do this work alone, especially if we're working in a system that hasn't evolved in terms of policies or in terms of grading practices or whatever. And I invite you to switch your Zoom view out to that gallery view and just look at all of the names and all of the faces and all of the folks that are here with you. So know that you're part of this community, that you're not in this work alone, that we are doing this good work together. And I think that is probably one of my favorite things about this whole initiative, is just feeling like I'm part of this community who cares and who's really invested in making our schools and our classrooms a better place. I heart all of you just in time for Valentine's Day. There you go.
Great, thank you. And that's one of the things I love about this job is connecting you to each other. I think you need to know that. That's very true, that, you know, if we don't have these opportunities, we don't know we have like-minded souls out there. Great, thank you, everybody.
And thank you, Stephanie and Melanie, so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great school vacation week. Make sure, you know, you've said aloud your intentions of things to do that are not schoolwork. Make sure you do those. And I look forward to seeing you on March 4th.